Hi everyone, my name is Shauna, in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up for 2023. I read 7 books this month, which isn't that great, but in my defense, I had a rough month, so I think it's okay. So my average star rating this month was 3.14 stars, I believe, which is a little bit on the low side. I had some books that I didn't like at the start of the month, and I had one book that I didn't like at the end of the month, and that really tanked my overall star rating, average star rating for this month. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk about these 7 books. The first book that I read this month was called Your Place or Mine, and it is by Portia McIntosh. So I'm going to describe Your Place or Mine as what it actually is and not what the synopsis says it is, because the synopsis doesn't entirely capture all of the plot. So there's 2 plot lines, and they sort of like intersect with each other towards the end of the book. So the first plot line follows Serena and Ziggy. Serena and Ziggy are both given an offer to stay in their friend's house while their friend is on vacation. The issue is, Serena and Ziggy don't know about this until they show up to the house to see the house for the first time. So they're forced into living into this house together, but they immediately don't like each other. They immediately hate each other, and they're right at butting heads with each other. So it is a forced proximity, hate to love story. But then there's a second plotline that I feel is really important to talk about, because I definitely would not have requested this book on NetGalley if I had known about this other plotline. The other plotline follows Serena trying to expose her cheating boyfriend to the boyfriend's fiance. So yeah, I don't like cheating in books. I wish that this would have been in the synopsis, but the synopsis just tries to get you into the book through the forced proximity, hate to love. In case you can't tell based on the way that I'm talking about this book, I didn't like this book at all. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing style. I just felt like it just didn't work for me. There was a tons of like ... dots at the end of every single chapter, and I got really tired of it. Sometimes I felt like the narrator, so Serena, was trying to like talk to the readers, and I was like, this really isn't working for me. And I also felt that Ziggy was like really gross, and there was nothing appealing about him, and I'm like, how are we supposed to believe that anyone could fall in love with him? So unfortunately, this book just didn't work for me, so I gave it 1 star. I am thankful that I got a chance to read it from NetGalley, but I'm not a huge fan of it. And then the next book that I read was a little better, I guess. I mean, it's not great, but it's a little better. That is The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. This is the second book in the His Dark Materials series. I really like the first book, The Golden Compass, which is also called The Northern Lights in some other countries. So I was like, I am gonna like The Subtle Knife, but I didn't. So The Golden Compass follows this young girl named Lyra, and in her world, the people who live there have what are called demons. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it demons, I think. Daemons. Anyways, they're basically like their soul in an animal form, and it becomes like their best friend, their companion. They have to be together all the time. There's tons of like animals. There's really interesting plot twists in the first book, and I was like, The Subtle Knife has got to follow along and be as great, but it's not. So The Subtle Knife introduces a character named Will, and Will is looking for his father, and Will is from a different world than Lyra. Where do I even start with my issues with this book? So first of all, it's boring as crap. I'm sorry, it is just very boring. It very much has second book syndrome. I'm currently reading the 3rd book, and while I'm not a huge fan of the 3rd book, it is definitely better and has more action than this book. Another issue I had with this book was Lyra's personality felt really bland. And so her personality in the first book was like really fun to me, so to have her just be bland in this book was really disappointing. Will's personality was bland, but I wasn't as upset about that because I couldn't like compare him to whoever he was in book 1, because he wasn't in book 1. And I got a little fed up with like the main plot in this book. I mean, the main like conflict sort of thing. I don't know how to word it. So basically, there are some characters that you sort of understand are villains at the end of The Golden Compass. In this book, they are trying to kill the authority, which is the equivalent of God, and this is where the controversy for the series comes in. If you're writing a book about people trying to kill God, like singular, the God, a lot of people go, oh, this is anti-Christianity. I actually feel like this book, though, was more of like against all organized religion as opposed to Christianity in particular, so I think this book gets a little more hate than it deserves. I also think it's a fictional story, so it's not like Philip Pullman is going, go kill God, screw all religion. He's not necessarily doing that. He's just talking about the religion in this book having problems and people not liking it. But every time that they would go on these religion tangents, I'm like, why did you even have to do this? The first book was so good and didn't go on these anti-religion tangents, and then this book just decided, oh, that's gonna be a huge part, and there was like these long winding passages about religion, and I'm like, my eyes are rolling into my head. I just am bored out of my mind. But this book wasn't like the worst thing in the world. I did like the settings a lot, so I gave it 2 stars, but did not like it. It has terrible second book syndrome. It is just setting up the final battle in the 3rd book, which I'm like almost 100 pages into the 3rd book and they haven't started the final battle yet. So it still feels like there's a lot of time that needs to set up the final battle. But anyways, The Subtle Knife is just so disappointing. Very upset about it. And then I read Infinite Dark, which I read from Kindle Unlimited. I try and read one book, at least one book, on Kindle Unlimited every month, just so I'm getting my money worth out of Kindle Unlimited. Infinite Dark is by Paige Morgan, and it is the 2nd book in a series. The first book was Violet City, which I read a couple years back. Now, Violet City is a very typical young adult alien invasion story with romance. And so I didn't have high expectations for Infinite Dark, so imagine my surprise when this is the first book that I enjoy in 2023. Infinite Dark picks up several months after the events of Violet City. So since it takes place several months after Violet City, you sort of get to see how the humans are reacting to the aliens. You get to see some people who are trying to like be supportive of them, be kind to them, and you see other people who are wanting to violently get them off of Earth. And there is still romance in here, and I don't want to spoil too much of it because I feel like the story goes really fast, the plot goes really fast. If I describe too much, I'm going to be giving way too much away. But Infinite Dark is just a big step up from the first book, Violet City, and it is just so great. And I love the way that the aliens are described in this series, specifically their eyes. I find that really fascinating. So I give this one 4 stars. I'm sorry that I can't like describe in more detail what this book is about, but I just really don't want to spoil it for people. I think that if you want a fun alien invasion story, definitely pick up this series, which starts with Violet City and then it goes on to Infinite Dark. But just keep in mind that this isn't going to be like the most spectacular series you've ever read in your life, but it will be enjoyable, it will be light and fun. I really hope that there's a 3rd book because I feel like there is so much left to explore, and I really want the 2 main characters to just like have their happy ever after. And we haven't gotten that yet, so I'm very much hoping that Paige Morgan decides to do a 3rd book in the series at some point in the future. And then the next book that I read, I had a bit of a eventful time reading this book. I got COVID in the middle of reading this book and I was just really out of it with COVID, so I really wanted to like finish the story, but I had COVID, so I wasn't feeling well, so I was like, just read one chapter at a time, just take it one page at a time, and I just slowly made my way through this book. This book is Set Fire to the Gods. This is by Sarah Rash and Kristen Simmons. Set Fire to the Gods is a book that I have been highly anticipating for a really long time. It came out in 2020, but I kept putting off reading it, and I was also in the hospital when it came out, so like I couldn't just pick it up and start reading it when it came out. Set Fire to the Gods is a fantasy story, high fantasy, and it takes place in this world in which there is 7 gods. So there was this one god, and she was like the creator, and then she decided to sort of like split her soul and take her essence out to make 6 kids, essentially. So she has 6 other gods that she's created, and there is also humans that she's created. Well, these gods decide to overthrow the creator, and so the creator's been dead for a while, and there's just these 6 gods, and they have split the world up into different sections for each god to have, and each god is in charge of an element. So there's fire, earth, water, air, and there is plants, and there's animals. So that's just the world and how it's set up. But this story follows 2 people who are entered into this tournament. So when there's wars between these gods over resources and land, these gods select several people to be gladiators. They can use powers that they obtained from their god. So Ash, right here, she is a fire gladiator. So she is going into this war to fight, and she controls fire. Matic right here is supposed to be a earth gladiator, but he is undivine. He is called Pigstock. He doesn't have the earth power. So they're both entered into this tournament to decide who gets to win the war. It's a gladiator style tournament where two people are put up against each other to kill each other, and they have semi-final rounds where it has two people of the same like land going after each other, so two earths going after each other, two fires going after each other, etc. And then the final round is between an earth and a fire. So it's sort of like if the Hunger Games were to meet Avatar: The Last Airbender, but you were to add in like gods and mythology. So I really enjoyed this one, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The only issue I had with this book is just that it's like really dense with the information thrown at you for the first like third of the book, and that really slowed down the pace for me. But after that first third, it really picks up and gets better. I felt like Matic and Ash were really great characters to center the story around. They're both really strong, they have really strong intentions and desires, and I love their connection to their family that each of them have. I feel like Matic and Ash sort of carried this book for me because I love the world and I love like the war and the gladiator style tournament, but just something about Matic and Ash, I just like fell in love with them and was rooting for them, and I really just enjoyed spending time with them. There is another book in this series that I have on my shelf, and I'm hoping to pick that up later this year. I'm sorry if you're hearing my dog cry. I know I've said this before. She gets very upset when I'm not with her. I tried to put her in a different kennel today because we have 2 kennels. I tried to put her in the kennel in the room where my brother's cat lives because she loves my brother's cat, but apparently this didn't work as intended to get her to be a little quieter. But I'm gonna go hang out with her after I finish this video. I'm gonna go snuggle her, give her all the love. So the next book that I read is called Promise Boys, and this is by Nick Brooks. I got this one off of NetGalley. Well, specifically, I won it in a Y'all West giveaway, and then I accessed it through NetGalley. I have really good giveaway luck, in case you don't know. It's my only flex in life. Promise Boys is described as the hate you give meets one of us is lying. Promise Boys is about this school, and in this school it's very intense, and it's an all-boys school, and they sort of have to follow really strict guidelines, and it's trying to shape them up to be better citizens, to be the best that they can be, to have the best opportunities in life. So it's very intense, and this story follows 3 boys. And these 3 boys' principal at the school ends up murdered. These 3 boys are all prime suspects, and a investigation ensues to try and figure out who murdered the principal, and all eyes are on these boys because these boys have different backgrounds that make people think that they are the murderers. So I really enjoyed this one. It's a mixed media format, so there's text messages, you get different snippets of like different people from the school or that know these boys who are giving statements about the boys. You get interviews between the police and the boys, and you get normal text too. I thought that it was really well done and really interesting, and I really loved Nick Brooks' writing. My only issue with this book is that like 45% of this book is exposition, which isn't necessarily a super bad thing, but I felt like there should have been more of a balance between the exposition and the actual story. But regardless, I really enjoyed my time reading this one, so I gave it 4 stars. I'm just gonna have to keep talking through the barking. So then the next book that I've read is my favorite book of this month, and I wasn't actually planning on reading this one, but when my mom had COVID, she was not as severe symptoms as me. Like, she was able to like read all day long while she was having COVID, and she was like, hey, you need to give me Tom Felton's books so that I can read it. So she read it in like 2 days, and then she was constantly like, Shauna, you have to read this. You have to read it. You have to read it right now. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. So this book is called Beyond the Wand, The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up a Wizard. It is Tom Felton's memoir. This was so incredibly good. So first of all, Tom Felton just has a great personality in general. Like, I've seen him at a Comic-Con before, and at his panels, his personality just really shines through, and he's just such a great guy, and I love his social media presence as well. So his personality really shines through in this book. It literally felt like you were just reading just him talking about his life, and it didn't feel like forced or awkward like some memoirs. It just felt so authentic and so true to who he is. I loved the Harry Potter stories in here. This book mainly focuses on Harry Potter, although there is discussion of other topics as well. I loved all the Harry Potter stories. I love the stories in particular of Gary Oldman, Alan Rickman, Warwick Davis, and Alfred Enoch. There is also some serious stuff in here at the end of the book. He talks about sort of like rehab and mental health treatment, but I thought he covered those topics really well and tried to break the stigma. It sounds like Astoria is barking up here and making Cookie bark downstairs. This is a mess. I'm so sorry. I promise at some point I'll figure out how to film with Astoria in the household. I haven't gotten around to it yet. It's been chaotic with her. So yeah, Beyond the Wand I think is a new favorite nonfiction book for me, and it makes me really excited to read books by more of the Harry Potter cast. I mean, specifically I have Ivana Lynch's book and Alan Rickman's book up on my shelf, but I do know there are other Harry Potter cast members like Warwick Davis who have books out. So yeah, go read Beyond the Wand. Even if you're just like a mediocre Harry Potter fan, I think you'll really, really like this book. And then I read a book that I didn't like to end the month. So I always download free iBooks onto my phone, and I always have like a goal every year to read like a certain number of these free iBooks. And so I was like, okay, time to read one for my first one of the year, and I started with this book called Everblue, which is by Brenda Pandos, and this is the first book in the Mertale series. So this is a mermaid book. I mean, it's appropriate to end January with this book because I feel like there was two plot lines like in Your Place or Mine, the first book that I read for this month. And these two plotlines didn't intersect until way into the book. So in this book, Ash and Tatiana are best friends, and Ash is crushing on Finn, Tatiana's brother. But Finn is a merman and Tatiana is a mermaid, and they are suddenly told that they have to go and live in their underwater city, and Ash doesn't know that they are mermaids. So Ash is going about her normal life. She's going to school. She's dating someone who is not the guy that she has a crush on. She is going to a prom, I think it might be called a different dance. It's just some school dance. And meanwhile, the plotline with Finn and Tatiana was a lot more interesting because they are stuck in their underwater city and they are not happy with being there. Eventually, these two plot lines intersect and become more unified, but for a lot of the story they're very much separate. In Ash's plotline, I was like, maybe we shouldn't even have her point of view because she just like, oh, I'm going to school, I'm doing a swim competition, I'm going to a dance, and I was like, this very much has nothing to do with the plot of the series. So I was really frustrated with that. And then in this mermaid world, there's this thing called a promise, which when a mermaid or a merman kisses someone else, and that person is promised to them. So the person that they kiss falls hopelessly in love with them, and they can't break this promise. So it sounds interesting at first because it sounds like a true love kiss, and it sounds actually like fun. I mean, it's cliche, but I was like, it's not that bad. But then I realized, oh, if a mermaid sexually assaults someone, like forcefully kisses someone without their consent, then the victim falls hopelessly in love with their attacker. So that is very messed up. And I was like, no, I'm not vibing with this. And then I'm also not vibing with the fact that like the world is like, oh, if you were a female mermaid, then you will seduce other people and like not be able to control the fact that you're seducing human men, so you can't leave without a mermaid man to like protect you, make sure you don't seduce people. I was like, that's very sexist. It almost felt like victim blaming in some sense, like, because some people, when they're victims of sexual assault, people are like, oh, it's because you seduce them with your body and stuff. So I was like, this is very messed up. This whole mermaid world is sexist. And so I just ended up not enjoying it. I did like the mermaid world, like how it was physically described, but this was like not a good book for me, and it was my first mermaid book, so like hopefully it gets better, because as of right now I'm not a huge fan of mermaid books. I like the concept, I think it can be done well, I just think this one was not done well. So I gave this one 2 stars. So those were the 7 books I read this month. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me if you haven't already. I am very sorry about my dogs barking. Again, I'm gonna try and figure out how to work on this. I've only had Astoria for a month and a half and I'm still trying to figure some things out. So I've got to figure out how to have her be chill while I'm filming videos. She's not food motivated or toy motivated, so I can't just like give her food or a toy. It's weird. I've never had a dog that has been not motivated by food, so still trying to figure this thing out. I hope all of you had a great start to your reading year. I hope you read some good books. I hope that next month all of you read some good books too. I'm very much looking forward to everything that I'm going to be reading in February. Anyways, until next time, goodbye.